My project is on Henry Clay, an American lawyer who was from Kentucky and had a very large influence on the Jacksonian era in its aspects of social life, the economy, and the politics surrounding the time. This is a photo of Henry Clay, and this was a portrait that he had done, and it's portraying him in his very, very young years before he was in the political world as a senator and before he ran for president multiple times. This is when he was a lawyer in Kentucky and before he started making large impacts. My overview essay had a few main points, including the internal improvements that Henry Clay wanted to make that became known as the American system. These improvements were improvements to the infrastructure system, our economic system by imposing tariffs on imported goods, and an attempt to improve the national bank. Henry Clay was also very influential in a political party known as the Whig Party, who today is compared to the current Republican Party. The Whig Party started fading away from society after Clay's death, which shows how influential he was in this period and how much he was responsible for keeping this party alive. Henry Clay was also a big influence on the War of 1812 because he had so much power and because he was involved in the government in more ways than one. He was able to give speeches and write letters that had a larger impact than a normal everyday person would have. Henry Clay was known as a war hawk, which I'll go into a bit later. I learned these sources by reading them and comparing them to today's society, but also by taking key facts and key points from each one of these articles and each one of these books and researching them in other sources and in other reviews. I read multiple book reviews, which I found almost more helpful than the books. The secondary source that I found the most helpful was Henry Clay, The Essential American. This book was super easy to read and to understand. It was very clear, and the author did a great job of limiting his bias and still providing extremely accurate information. This book provided both sides to Henry Clay's story, not only his political life, but also his own life and his own personal life, and how his personal ideas and his personal struggles impacted his political, economical, and social outlooks. This book also gave many aspects across the years and provided facts that were not only from in the era of the 1812 war, but also through slavery and nearly to the Civil War. The primary source that I used was a speech on the American system given by Henry Clay at a Congress meeting. This speech was very helpful to me because I know, because Clay gave it, that the facts he stated were exactly how he intended the American system to be, even if other people were twisting the way that he wanted it to be. Because he gave this speech, I could really see the true facts and the true way that he intended it. This clarified a lot of the ideas for me as well, because he referred back to each one of the improvements he intended to make with the American system and explained them in multiple ways. He explained the tariffs as a way to help our economy, but he would also use those tariffs to give back to the community and the national system so that we could have improvements in infrastructure, like in the roads and the canals, which was a key point in the American system. He also wanted to improve the national banking system in a manner that would help create a large credit and really foster an era that would be able to make credit for the country as a whole. Although this speech was very, very helpful, it was only from one perspective because it was a speech. So I had to take an account for the bias that was here because he was using this as a way to persuade people to view from his point. This speech really showed his merit in education of the law because he was able to give this speech in a manner that was extremely persuasive and in a way that showed the positives to everything that he was saying. This also showed his power because he was able to persuade many, many people. Henry Clay was an extremely likable person, which also helped his giving of this speech, and in general as a politician, he was able to do well because he was likable and very charismatic. The scholarly article that I found to be the most impactful was an article that is titled "Some Partisan Fights Never End." This was an article written about the Compromise of 1850, which is a compromise Henry Clay was involved in and showed his involvement in slavery. Henry Clay was involved in the decision of the Missouri and the Maine statehood. Missouri wanted to enter the statehood of the United States, and due to the unbalance they had, there needed to be another state. Missouri was primarily a southern-based culturally society, so they favored slavery, and there was a long time where there was kind of a stalemate between if this country or if this state could be a free state or a slave state, and which was more fair if it was uneven. In the end, Maine was also admitted to statehood, and they were a free state, leaving Missouri to be a slave state. This article was also a great way to show me a perspective of multiple government-involved people and their opinions on Clay. This was also a representation of the Whig Party and how it resembles the Republican Party and the ideas it had towards civil rights. In conclusion, Henry Clay wasn't only a presidential candidate. He was also very impactful on society and economy. Although he was never elected president, he was able to make large improvements within each sector of the government. Clay was very likable, as I mentioned earlier. He was very charismatic, and that also had a large impact on where he stood. He was made a Secretary of State by John Quincy Adams due to his swaying of opinion on the political voting. And John Quincy Adams, the president of the time, elected Clay to be the Secretary of State. A lot of people attribute this primarily to Clay's swaying opinion, but some attribute Clay's Secretary of State position to his charisma and to the fact that John Quincy Adams liked Clay as a person and a politician. The issue between Clay and John Quincy Adams became known as the corrupt bargain. Because Clay created this large and overarching American system, we still see a lot of flashes of it in today's society. The relationships he had in this time were very differing from political party to political party, and it seemed to be that people either really liked him, which was almost the popular opinion, or they completely hated him. Alrighty, and that is it for my presentation on Henry Clay. Thank you.